We're now going to give the ability to different users to have different groups. So we can perhaps incorporate an admin group or a moderator group or just a standard user basically. And we'll perform a check on the home page just to let the user know what kind of permissions they have, and we can really drill down sort of deep into this and give them very specific permissions. But for now we're just going to focus on a user being either a standard user or being an administrator. So basically these permissions here as a JSON object or string, we'll look at what that means in a minute if you're unfamiliar, basically govern what these different rights do. So this is very, very straightforward, and the method to actually extract this and check is very straightforward as well. But let's go ahead and just define how we sort of want this to look on the home page. So on the home page I'm just going to create a check down here, and I'm going to say if user has permission, and I'm going to say admin. So that there is the sort of the property value here. So if the user has permission admin, for example, I'm just going to echo out in a paragraph, you are an admin. It's straighter, I guess. Now this can also be on a page per page basis, so we could perform this check at the top of a page, or if we might say if not user has permission, and we might then redirect to, you know, a 404, or we might redirect back to the home page or something like that. For now we're just going to demonstrate this functionality here, and you know that's how it's going to work out. Now when we refresh we obviously get an error because we haven't created this functionality in our user class. So let's go ahead and do that now. And let's go down here, and we'll say public function has permission. Okay, so obviously we need the ability to define what kind of key we're looking for. So we obviously have key value pairs as we've seen in the database, but we want to determine what group they're actually in first of all. So we're going to say if this, we're going to say group is this db get, and we're going to grab data from our groups table, and we want to say where, we want to say where ID equals this data group. And the reason for that is, let's go ahead and just print our on group first. The reason we want to do that is so at the moment we are just a standard user, so we're outputting ID of 1, which is the ID that corresponds to a standard user, and the name is a standard user, permissions, blah blah blah. But let's go ahead and just change the user that's currently logged in, which is myself, to a group of 2. And when we refresh we can see that we have the name of the sort of group we're in and the permissions here. Now what we need to do is decode this, because it's at the moment it's a JSON object. We want to decode this so we have a PHP array. Now this sounds a bit difficult, but if you're unfamiliar what JSON is, it's JavaScript object notation, and it's just notation in the form of a JavaScript object, which is a lightweight data transfer format. So it basically allows us to store a sort of not a complex structure, but a structure of data here, but without defining it in an odd way, like a comma separated way, for example. We're defining it as a JSON object. So this is valid, perfectly valid JSON. And for example, we might also want this user to be a moderator, so we could create the functionality to look like this. Like that, and 1 just signifies that they are, and 0 would signify that they aren't. So that's basically how we're going to do it. So let's save that anyway, and we can use that in some of our checks later, so you can see that that's now changed. So what we need to do is decode this. So instead of print R, we want to first of all check whether actually the user is in a group or not. We'll assume they are because that value should always be required, whether or not they're a standard user or anything else. What we then want to do is extract the permissions, which are obviously group, which we've got here first, and that will be permissions. Like that. So we've extracted the permissions, but at the moment all these permissions are is just the let's just have a look. Permissions. That is just a JSON object like that. So what we now need to do is decode it, and that's using the JSON decode function in PHP. Now by default this will return an object, but we want this to return an array, so we can just pick the key out of it. So we're just going to pass true there. So if we now go ahead and print R on permissions, we can now see that we have an array of admin1, moderator1. So we've now taken that, converted it essentially, or decoded it into a PHP array. What we can now do is we can say if permissions key, and key comes from what we pass through to it. So for example, if permissions admin, we could say is equal to true. I mean, this wouldn't work because we're using we're type checking as well, but we could say that, for example, and then we can return true. Now otherwise what we might want to do is, well, probably what we do want to do is just return false in case any of that doesn't work. So what we now do is refresh, and oops, again I've said permission instead of permission, so let's just change that. There we go. So you are an administrator, and we can do exactly the same thing. For example, if we want to check if we're a moderator, and it would work in exactly the same way, like that. You're a moderator, but when I go ahead and I modify my user record to say that I'm in group 1, that simply won't work because I don't have the relevant permission. So that is really it. We've demonstrated how we can create a really small but effective permission system just by introducing another method and introducing a JSON object into our groups, one of the fields in our groups. And obviously you don't need to replicate this for every user because the user is just mapped to this particular ID. So as long as a user is user ID 2, they are an administrator and they have the permissions here which can be checked. So you could have moderator and then moderator 1, admin, admin 1, or you can have just super user, they're an admin, they're a moderator, etc. So this is how we created a basic permission system and how we've detected the type of a user.